In a world where we are closer together due to globalization and the internet and being able to talk with people around the world, there are a lot of things that you see disappearing. One of which is the idea of the local branding of what we would call superheroes. What's up, Internet? Jay here with Nerd Rage Against the Machine, and today I'm going to talk about superheroes, and specifically how we're seeing them now in Japan, and kind of in the States, and how those countries have kind of intermingled, if you will. So years ago, I wrote an RPG called Super Happy Sentai Hour, which was about Japanese superheroes. It was it was due to my love of Japanese Sentai. I had discovered Sentai with a little series called Dynaman, which was a comical redub of Tokosensei Dynaman, where actually one of the kids in the hall and several other comedic actors revoiced the entire series. A couple of years later, Haim Saban would basically do something similar with a little show called Jirenja, or as we know it here in the States, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The difference is that while Dynaman simply, first off, was more adult and had just straight up comic redubs, everything, even the out of costume stuff was redubbed. This American version would cut the Japanese actors out, replace them with clean cut American kids, and simply called the series for its effects and its martial arts fights. Now, this is actually, fun fact about this was not the first time this was going to happen. Stan Lee had actually talked about and wanted to do the same damn thing with Sun Vulcan, but couldn't get the anyone really interested in the project. And before that, Marvel had an agreement with Toei, which brought us the Japanese Spider-Man. And anyone who's seen the Japanese Spider-Man probably has groaned at this point about, oh my god, yeah, it's the show with the giant spider mech. Well, that was due to, again, this cross-pollination agreement. We got the Shogun Warriors, which we Americanized to no end. Mazinger, Raiden, all turned into a Marvel comic set of heroes. Meanwhile, they got Spider-Man, and more than that. The popularity of Spider-Man in Japan, and specifically the giant mech Leopardon, was introduced into their Sentai. At that point, there was now an edict that all Sentai would have this giant robot, this big, hulking machine. And later, of course, it would become a Gestalt vehicle set, as we would see like in Power Rangers, where the dinosaurs become the big Megazord. Now, pardon me, to that end, they also would use Hellas from Thor, the character that Kate Blanchett played, was in, I believe, Denji Man. Also, Battle Fever J, which was the next Sentai after Spider-Man, was supposed to be 5 international heroes, and Miss America from that was supposed to be the same Miss America as in Marvel Comics. So there was already some mixing of these two genres, for sure. Now, one thing I want to kind of go into here is a brief idea of what Sentai is. So Sentai in Japan literally means battle team. And it really became their form of superheroing, if you will. Their comic book heroes. So, as much as you like Superman, they liked, Jaka or Go Ranger. Now, saying that, there's a lot of obvious differences. The big one being how these teams look. If you've seen Power Rangers, it's 5 kids in multicolored spandex with helmets. And you compare that to, say, the Avengers, where you have, a Norse god, a guy in a battle armor, a super soldier, a green Goliath, and a dude who can shoot a bow and arrow really well. Oh, and a Russian agent in a catsuit. So how do we get there, first off? Now, the obvious thing is, if we look back at superheroes, starting with Superman, There was never this intention for them to team up originally. Superman was his own book. Then Bob Kane came out with The Batman, and that was going to be its own book. And then eventually, this idea in comic books coalesced of, hey, if we, since we own the rights to both these characters, and if we put them together, that's more sales. One, it's another book, but two, we can cull from the audience of Batman fans and Superman fans who will read World's Finest or Justice League. It also worked as cross-promotion. So you love Batman. He's in Justice League. You should read Justice League. And maybe you'll start liking Flash or Aquaman or Wonder Woman or Superman because of that? Maybe. So that was really the idea behind this, was it drew sales. It was cross-promotion effectively. Meanwhile, with Sentai in Japan, it started with the series Go Ranger in the early 70s. Now, they'd had some other tokusatsu shows, which, again, we can technically pull this all the way back to Godzilla. The popularity of Godzilla brought in tokusatsu or transformed heroes into the cultural mainstream. So you had characters like Spectreman, Ultraman, the Space Giants, most of the stuff that Ted Turner kind of pulled over as well. That Monster of the Week, one guy who gets big and fights monsters thing as a series. And that's really where, Sentai started to come from, the idea of we could do a team like this, a team of heroes. Now, again, this was on TV. The other big thing was it was also heavily subsidized by the toy companies. So the vehicles were there, again, to sell the toys. They were there to literally, hey, kids, you like that vehicle that they fly in this show? Here's your chance to get your own. And this also goes back to the heroes. So where, again, our heroes, again, look wildly different, theirs don't. That's because the toy companies are subsidizing these, and quite honestly, if you're going to sell toys of the Power Rangers, how much easier is it to tool one body and maybe even one head and just put stickers and color differences on them? A lot. In fact, the original 1990s Power Rangers 8-inch figures even did so with the Pink Ranger, and this was a tradition going back into Japanese Sentai of the same thing, where they would just use the same body for everybody, so therefore the Pink Ranger had the body of a dude. Not even, half-assedly. And not like the Yellow Ranger, where in the Japanese version it was a boy, in the American version they made it a female actress, which is a redundant statement, but basically, used an actress as opposed to an actor. Now, so my point here is, kind of give you guys some basis on this. At this point, Japan has seen a lot more of American comic books, and we've seen a lot more of Japanese. The rise of anime, the rise of manga, the rise of Sentai even. Pretty much since Power Rangers, most Super Sentai shows have been redubbed into for an American audience. In fact, it's gotten so crazy that Power Rangers was actually redubbed into Japanese and sent back to Japan. So they would then see the American version with, the witch Bandura now being called Rita Repulsa. In fact, they even got the same actress to voice Rita Repulsa as did the entire acting of Bandura for Jirenja. So with that end, with this kind of cross-pollination, we now see series like My Hero Academia and Tiger and Bunny here in the States, where, they are more like American traditional superheroes. If you look at the cast of My Hero Academia, Deku, All Might, Uravity, they all very much are your typical American-style superheroes. Same thing is true with Tiger and Bunny. There are some obvious holdovers from Japanese culture. One big one being that there's kind of a vagueness to some superpowers. Again, that was very prevalent in Sentai series because we didn't want to have to explain them. They weren't quantified, whereas, say, like the Flash is very fast, Green Lantern can create things with his rings, Spider-Man is got the proportional strength of a spider, can crawl walls and shoot his webs. Sentai heroes, if they had any powers that were beyond just really tough, fast, badass martial artists, it was something minor, like could talk to animals. and like one guy might have that, and they would use it as subplot. Versus again the Atom, shrinking is his thing. That's all there is to that character. And you can see that in a lot of characters and American heroes. And so with shows like Tiger and Bunny and My Hero Academia, we're now seeing that. The other big thing I've noticed is that in these shows, an importance of creating a structure. In Tiger and Bunny, superheroes are basically corporate sponsored in a way that's almost like Vought Corporation from The Boys, but way less sinister. The heroes themselves are still heroes, and their powers come out independently, but they're on TV and they're worried about their ratings and things, which makes for an interesting show. I would definitely say that I've watched the entirety of Tiger and Bunny. It's worth seeing, and it is an interesting view into how Japanese fans, or how the Japanese would see an American style of superhero. The same thing is true with My Hero Academia. And in fact, I've got to say, it's one of my favorite anime series of all time at this point. I love the emphasis on being a hero. The character of Deku, and again, I'm not trying to spoil anything, but starts out with no powers in a world where 90% of people have something. Now, the idea here, again, going back to that structure I talked about earlier, is that everyone 90% of people have some power, but normally it's pretty minor. Like I could teleport, lift objects maybe 10 pounds at most with my mind, which useful but not mind-blowing. But if your powers are amazing, then you have a chance at going to school for that, and yeah, you could work for the government as a professional superhero, which is an interesting way of dealing with it. Deku is a kid who has no powers, but his heroism is there, and then through means that I won't really explain, he ends up gaining a superpower. And the reason I won't explain it is because I think it's worth seeing. At which point he then gets the chance to go to one of the best college superhero schools in the country. And what you see is a character who doesn't have it all together yet, but is there in heart, and is there as a character, as a hero. And that's really what makes that show work, is the emphasis on heroism. This is mostly just observation, I'll admit that, but I thought it was worth bringing up because, again, having researched Sentai and that being the kind of the way that Japanese heroes worked in the past. I mean, you could even see this in shows like Sailor Moon and other series, to see them now kind of adopt this. And the reverse is true. There was an American Power Rangers movie not maybe a few years back, and this was actually when I was writing Super Sentai. I did watch it for research, and it felt definitely far more of an American movie, using the elements, at least the idea of the 5 suits, the power crystals, and everything else that had kind of been at least a tacked on history of Power Rangers that Saban had come up with, but again, taken to a more American cinematic Hollywood level. And it's interesting to me to see how these two kind of cross-pollinate now, and how Sentai, or Power Rangers if you want to call it that, although that's a fraction of what Sentai is, but how that Sentai has kind of influenced American creators, and how American comics have now really influenced Japanese creators, and other creators around the world. We also see series like Miraculous out of France, which definitely feels like a pastiche of both. It has some Sentai moments, especially with the central location of powers, and how these characters get their powers, and definitely has an anime feel. At the same time, the costumes are American. They did an episode. My daughter's a huge fan, so I had to watch it. I swear that's what it was. But they did an episode where they went to America, so you got to see American superheroes. And it felt like American superheroism through a French lens. So I think it's interesting. This is one of those things that in some respects, these local flavors are starting to kind of coalesce. For good or for bad, it's hard to tell. But honestly, from what I've seen, I enjoyed Tiger and Bunny. I recommend it. I enjoyed My Hero Academia. I recommend that. And while Miraculous is maybe a little more for a younger audience, it certainly beats a lot of the stuff she likes, and I can sit through it without trouble. It really was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that as well. So I urge you as fans who are interested in comics and the comic book culture to to look outside of Marvel DC and also look outside of the American borders. You might find some interesting things, not just in France and Japan, but definitely there's a good place to start. And with that, I say happy viewing, and I bid you adieu.